Greetings, fellow explorers, and welcome to episode 9 of Geekoscopy 101, the podcast show that highlights the nexus between science, story, wonder, and philosophy. With me, your host, Dr. Kirsten, and today we're exploring the depths of media with none other than the FusRoDoc of gaming himself, Dr. Emory S. Daniel. How are you doing, Dr. Daniel?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm doing exceptionally well. I'm really excited to speak to you. Like I said earlier, you're here under the recommendation of one Dr. Rachel Court from episode 8. And I had a look into, I think we connected like on Twitter like a few weeks ago, I think, but haven't really spoke to each other.
Yeah.
And so I had a look at the stuff that you've been doing, and I think we might be kindred spirits on some level. We definitely might be one of a handful of people that have played Shining Force on this planet, and it's always good to see people speaking about it on the internet because it's so rare. Like I don't have conversations about Shining Force with anybody.
It's funny because I mentioned that at a PAX East that I'd love for a remake or something like that. And I had like one person out of a room of 400 people go, woo! So I'm like, that is my kindred spirit right there. One person. So the fact that you knew off of that screenshot, I was very impressed.
Yes. And before we continue talking about video games and streaming and stuff like that, why don't you let everybody know a bit about yourself and what you do?
So yes, thank you. And first and foremost, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I am Dr. Emory S. Daniel Jr. I am an assistant professor at Appalachian State University in the mountains of North Carolina in the United States. I teach primarily advertising courses, primarily with social media analytics and data, but I do a lot of research in entertainment media. So this stretches not only for binge watching in television, telepresence, and gaming, but also I do a lot of work in my the work I do primarily is in parasocial relationships, which are considered one-way relationships between an audience member and somebody that is on camera. So those are the primary things that I do. I'm also a marketing director for Geeks Like Us, and I am the vice chair of the National Communication Association Game Studies Division. So got a lot of hats that I wear.
Yeah. As I was looking through all the stuff you're doing, I don't know where you have the time. Do you have like a time machine somewhere that you're using, or remember all?
Yeah, I hang out with Hermione Granger a lot, and she lets me borrow her time turner so I can be at 5 places at once.
You got to know people in high places to get ahead.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So amongst all the possible hobbies that you could have come across in your life, how do you end up gravitating towards video games and researching those?
It really was something that I had always been interested in. I mean, again, from having the Sega channel when I was a young kid and playing, again, games like Shining Force, I really became engulfed with story-related games. And obviously within the older systems, that just wasn't really too much of an opportunity to have story-driven games. But, I bought a Nintendo 64. I played a lot of Star Fox, Zelda, Rayman, a lot of Rareware games, that kind of thing. And it was kind of one of those things that just kept coming back into my life. Like I'd stop for a while and then I'd start playing again because in college, when I was in my undergrad, I'd meet friends that played a lot of Soul Calibur, and I got really invested in Soul Calibur 2 for the GameCube. So again, it was just things that I kept gravitating back to. And honestly, this was not even on my radar until about 3 years ago to actually start researching games, because what occurred was I never really saw myself having a future in researching games because of, for the most part, how the stereotype was how trivial they are, and they're not art. And, is this something that's really going to be something other than a fad? And, I got up with Dr. Anthony Bean about writing for the psychology of Zelda, and I was just fresh off a study writing about the Kubler-Ross model. So just kind of I was bored during the summer between finishing my doctorate and going for my next job. I helped co-author a paper about the Kubler-Ross stages of Greece and how it relates to Majora's Mask with Dr. Garsky and Dr. Freaking his name, Carey. Excuse me. And they were awesome. And I went to a couple PAX conventions in the United States, and it just kind of took a life of its own. Where I was approached by Dr. Bean, and he was like, "We're going to be trailblazers for this research because there's just not that many people doing it, and it's all brand new." And it really put a fire under my feet, and I was ready to go. So it's been something that I've been really passionate about researching over the past 3 years, not only in writing in book chapters, but we've got several journal articles that are under review right now that we're really excited about. And it's been a lot of fun being able to research some of the things that you love. And that's kind of how I got into it, was just a lone book chapter that I didn't think would be anything but just a fun project. And now it's taken a life of its own.
Yeah. It's very interesting stuff and fairly new. Like it's new research that's just emerging, like over the past 10 to 20 years. Just because video games haven't been around for that long, and we don't actually know as well how video games affect our brains and our daily lives compared to other things that might have been around for longer. So it's fascinating work, and I'm sure it's very exciting. I would like to be involved in stuff like that, but I'm not in that field. I'm a marine biologist, but it's still pretty cool though. As somebody who also plays video games since I can remember, I've probably played video games for longer than I've wanted to be a marine biologist, like at least 4 years longer. So it's such a deep part of who I am. And I think that now there's kind of legitimacy in the media, and it's, such a large amount of money that's being now produced on a global scale, overtaking things like movies. And I think, it took a long while to get to this point where it's kind of mainstream. I remember trying to look for people who enjoyed video games or anime or anything like that in 2010 was difficult to do. Like, you couldn't get a hold of people who enjoyed the same type of stuff that you did. Nowadays, it's much easier to connect with people. So it's really cool that the research is starting to pick up. So what research questions do you enjoy answering, or you're trying to work on at the moment?
So we've got a couple that we're working on right now. The main one that is really important to a couple of research that we collaborate a lot on is through Dr. Fauché and Dr. Orm. All three of us were really interested in understanding how parasocial relationships work with audience members and streamers, because we had seen a couple anecdotal tweets that were going around of streamers saying, some of the information that's being shared around here is my private information. This is akin to voyeurism, where an audience member would be on a stream but not disclose that they are watching them, and having some tendencies that were making the streamers extremely uncomfortable. So, we were like, wow, this is a really scary part of parasocial relationships, where if a streamer and an audience member were to go to a convention, they would sit there and go, this person has a very strong relationship with me, but I don't share that. So we became really fascinated with it. But it also spurred something that we weren't anticipating when we were doing the research, was how mental health is being portrayed on stream. So one of the things that came out of the data, since we were doing in-depth interviews, so, with qualitative research, you kind of let the data flourish as kind of how you run your study. and in this case. And so one of the things we found was the term or the phrase "not your therapist" kept coming up from streamers, that they were like, these parasocial relationships that exist, again, of these people that are watching us, feeling like there's this very strong bond that I don't have as a streamer towards that person, is so strong that they're actually sharing very specific and very deep mental health issues that the viewer is experiencing. And that raised an entirely different concern. And we were like, wow, we need to research this. And this is extremely important. So, those were two things that we were looking at within our data. We're also looking at about how morality is portrayed within video games and narrative storytelling. I am a tertiary author on that one, but it is still something we're really invested in. We're also seeing how I'm a secondary author on another piece that we're taking a look on how things like loot box games deal with social identity and how people spend money based on social capital just because they're like, I love this franchise, ergo I'm going to make sure that I have as much involvement as possible, even if it means spending money on like mobile games or something like that. So we're doing that with the Final Fantasy mobile game as our phenomena that we're researching. So a lot of stuff going on right now. And that doesn't even include a lot of the psychology of famous video game series that we've done, that kind of thing. So again, a lot of research that we're doing right now, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. On that point of loot boxes being involved with social capital, is that the same mechanism as a sports fan with a sports team?
Yeah, it would absolutely be.
That is interesting. I never would have thought about it that way. Like loot boxes to me, it just seems like wasting money. And partially, there's different opinions on whether it's gambling. I just don't think it's very healthy in general. And I think it's weird. It's built off the model of like trading cards. You get a pack of something and you don't know what's in there, and you could get something really cool or you could get something terrible, but at least it was something physical that you could like trade between people. But with loot boxes, it's just totally digital, like it exists on a server somewhere. And I find it very weird. So I'm interested to see what you guys find.
There's a lot of there's a lot of group community, and again, for people that are like they play it within reasonable hours of the games, but they were like, I'm so invested in Final Fantasy and the characters, it only makes sense that I have something like a skin for my character that I really enjoy having. So it may not be something tangible, but for a lot of people, it's still very, very real and very much something that contributes to the identity that they work with within the game space.
Yeah. I can imagine that the wiring in the brain is probably very similar still, because it's something that you see and it means something to you, even if it's not physical. And what about streaming in particular? What sparked the idea of looking at streamers for research?
Just hanging out at PAX honestly started it. For me, it was just kind of like going to a Comic-Con, and I was looking for ways that I could look at my department here at the university and say, this is a good place where research can be conducted. So part of me was like, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy. But the other part of me was like, use your scientific brain and see if there are any patterns that you notice within the communities. And so I went to a couple of streaming panels because I watched, for example, Games Done Quick or GDQ on Twitch for a long period of time. And I just couldn't help but notice, all these patterns that were emerging. And so when I got to the convention, I started just talking to random streamers, getting their opinions on things. And that's kind of where it came up, where understanding a little bit of how audience members talk to a streamer when they're off camera versus in person, or excuse me, on camera versus in person. And again, I became fascinated with how does a streamer react to somebody that, again, feels like that they know them, and that there's no way that the streamer can have that same kind of bond, those relationships. Because, we're talking about people that have anywhere from 50 subscribers to 500,000 subscribers. So, over the past 3 years, I've taken the opportunity to, with my colleagues, to interview streamers in in-depth interviews and talking with them about their experiences. And we've found out a lot of interesting stuff to the point where we're looking to create modules for new streamers of what to expect with mental health and community management.
How involved, or do you even try to get the platforms involved in your research? Do you either get information or maybe help with data collection or anything like that?
So, aside from doing some mild data scraping from comments, I don't really get, and when you say platform, like bringing Twitch involved with this?
Or YouTube or Facebook or whoever that is actually running the streams.
Not currently, because I think this is so small scale, but I think as we start talking to bigger and bigger streamers, that there's more interest that's involved with it. I think we might see some movement in that case of maybe the platform seeing this as something useful to be able to use for their members. So that's the goal. Again, at this point, I'm a lowly college professor just trying to create some research that people would consider important.
yeah, for sure. But I'm sure as you guys continue to work and churn out papers, that it might spark the interest, maybe even get funding from them potentially, or just get data from them. I'm sure they have some kind of data that might be useful to you. I'm not sure what they track or whether they're allowed to track anything. I'm sure they're tracking a lot we don't know about. And you might be able to run experiments or papers on that. But talking about that, how do you collect data for that type of work?
Honestly, it depends on the study itself. I have always been a firm advocate for let the research question guide the research design, and let the research design direct the methodology. And so that's more or less how we've been doing this. For the streamer study, it only made sense to conduct in-depth interviews because we didn't feel like doing something through a questionnaire would get the exact experience for what we were interested in, which in this case was sharing in-depth personal stories from the streamer themselves. So this was very important to conduct in-depth interviews in that capacity. And it is also very important that we weren't doing focus groups because we understand that a lot of streamers have very strong privatized boundaries that they don't even want to share with other streamers. So having a focus group would make it so that they may not share all the things that they wanted to share within these interviews. So being able to understand the limitations of your study goes a long way, but it's certainly, not the only ones that I've done. If we were to look at audience members, for instance, we may look at a questionnaire for quantitative research. One of the ways that I've done things in the past for determining parasocial interaction is by content analyzing things like YouTube comments or Twitch comments, is by scouring every single one of them and seeing if the comment that they're using has any kind of pattern that we would say was consistent with a parasocial interaction. So, anything from just regarding praise or, again, it's something where maybe the Twitch streamer isn't responding, but at the same time is it's being communicated by the audience. And so we've done both ways. And again, it just depends on what we're researching. So currently we're doing in-depth interviews, but for something like you were mentioning, with going through Twitch, looking something at like big data research and going in and doing kind of content scraping, the comments would be very, very interesting in looking at narrative bits. So yeah, I mean, just depends on the question that you're looking for. Long story short.
Definitely. And I'm sure there's always also, you know, a toss up sometimes between the logistics of what you want to do, how much time there is, how much funding there's available. Because I'm sure that an in-depth interview is going to take much more time to do and energy than, you know, just asking somebody to fill out an online survey. So it's I'm sure it's always an interesting part of the process. But like you said, it's better to base that around that question instead of, you know, what's available to you in terms of money, which is always a problem for research. I'm sure we all understand. So now that you have...
for doing this study for 3 years,
So definitely for, you know, now looking into the literature and collecting data, and now writing papers, how are you either intending to, or how do you think this work will now help either with the gamers, the platform? Like, do you have any intentions of using this in a pragmatic way in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always been something that has been a goal of ours, is to do what's called applied research, which ultimately just means, can you use it pragmatically for people who use it the most? And that has always been a major consideration for any project I do, is can people use this data? So for the streamer study, one of the things that we've been most interested in and most wanting to do with it is when we were starting these interviews and when we were going through them, one of the things that came up the most, and I think it came up in every single interview, was the streamers would tell me, and they've been, you know, working for a number of years, they would say, in the beginning, I had zero clue with what I was doing. Which is, you know, the case for anything, right? You know, like if you're starting a sport and, you know, you're just beginning, you don't know a lot of things, but, you know, it's not necessarily in a grand scale where you're broadcasting your work to somebody, or, you know, you don't know the intricacies of how a chat works or why mods are so important when you start. And so this knowledge of kind of getting into the eyes of the streamers, that I was like, if people don't know what they're doing and we don't have classes to teach people how to become a streamer, that means there are a lot of people that are coming in this in the dark, that they're like, I don't know what the tools are to start off with. I don't have any advice to start me off with. And so one of the things that we were most interested in and what we want to do is, again, create training modules to say, look, this is how interactions might go on Twitch. And you might have somebody that is a troll that is just going to be mean, and how do you handle something like that? But what's infinitely more complicated is you might have somebody in there that projects something very personal to them, or something that is you know, a mental health issue that they're experiencing, you know, whether it be something like depression or, you know, what have you. And, you know, being able to handle that is extremely difficult, particularly if you are not, you know, someone who's a therapist. I'm a doctor. You know, I am a communication professor. However, I am not a therapist. So, you know, there are things that I have to be careful about what I say on my streams. So, and again, I knew that coming in because I know a lot of the ethical procedures that I have to follow as a university professor. However, there's a lot of people that don't know that. And by giving out this kind of information, it can be extremely dangerous, not only for the person that's watching, but also you as a streamer. And so our goal is to help understand those boundaries, understand what rules should you set up, understand how do you communicate this effectively to where you are doing so that is within the bounds of the law, for instance, but in good ethics as well, because this has been a case of not only giving therapy, but also research is, and one of the number one things I hear is if you mess this up, you can mess up somebody's life. And so being able to have those tools is critical. And so that's one of the reasons why this research and understanding that this is a problem at its core of these things being communicated is so detrimental. And that's why we want to pursue these tools to help streamers, especially beginning streamers, know what they might be getting into, especially if they've got a clear goal that they want to pursue this further. And so that's kind of the basis of our pragmatism behind the research. And we've got a long road ahead of us with it, but I think it's something that we will consider very rewarding in the end of it all.
That sounds really cool, kind of like a field guide for situations you might find yourself in. And it's definitely, I think, a unique place for people to be in, because, like Dr. Kowa told me, like the sort of thing kind of, the research behind it is usually to do with celebrities and the people who idolize them. But the difference, at least in the past, was that it was very, very difficult to interact with celebrities. Like you didn't get to see them often. You usually see them on TV. There's no interaction. But on a Twitch stream, a streamer can see your comment and they can reply to it, and that adds a layer of what would be the right word, interactivity and connection. That's a better word. So I can see how it would be something that is good for everybody to look at who wants to take streaming seriously. So I commend you guys for working on that.
And it's super interesting because to that point, you're absolutely spot on in terms of that additional layer. And one of the things we find out with parasocial relationships and interactions is that for Twitch streaming, you can make a pretty strong case for these are at the very least weak social interactions. They're not parasocial at all. If a Twitch streamer responds, that is a social interaction between the two of you. The complex thing is understanding whether it's a social relationship, because I might comment on I might comment to somebody that is on my comment section on my Twitch stream, but I may still not have any idea who that person is. And the bigger the streamer, the bigger problem that is, where, yes, that level of complexity comes up. And yes, we've been doing this research on celebrities that there's no way that they could contact those people that are big fans of theirs. But it is very much the case where we still have those problems of going to cons, and those levels of relationship building and intimacy are far different between the viewer and the streamer.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's going to be interesting to see how it changes over time as we get more people that become kind of internet famous and going to conventions and things when conventions come back one day. Especially,
I know. One of these days.
Especially in countries like mine in the third world, where we're still working on getting the internet in the first place, to everybody. So all of these things, you guys are like pioneering future culture for third world countries. So the number of these interactions are just going to skyrocket in the coming decades. So it's good that there's work being done now. How do you see gamer culture kind of changing over the next few years? Have you seen any interesting trends in either the data or just anecdotally?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing is that it's becoming more immersive in the social presence component of it. You know, gaming for the longest time, you know, when I was in college, we had landline parties playing Halo. And that was something that was really cool that we could have put on a headset and be able to interact with our friends while we were playing. Now it's become so commonplace that, you know, games are almost centered around that interconnectivity to the point where not only in synchronous communication, but asynchronous as well in terms of sharing. So, you know, one of the things that I always found so interesting was Zelda Breath of the Wild having a selfie function, which kind of baffled me. But, you know, it really did kind of get into a sign of the times that we're building a lot on how we interact with one another. And I think how COVID has done a lot with face-to-face communication, but when we look in terms of how we do gaming now, it's changed a lot of things as well. We adapt and we become more innovative for how we do things. So much like how game designers adapt their games for speedrunning communities, for instance. So, you know, releasing patches that are more friendly to making the game work more efficiently for finishing a game quicker. It's the same with becoming more social in this capacity. And so where I see this going is not only understanding that streaming is not going away. In fact, it's becoming bigger and bigger because of the times that we're doing, the times that we're in right now. But again, games are becoming more and more social as well. Again, whether it be synchronous of people communicating in real time or asynchronous. So the fact of the matter is we're probably going to see we're going to see a lot more functions of gaming, incorporating that probably into not only the, it could be like within the design itself. I think one of my favorite series that does it the best is Persona 5. Now, they don't incorporate a whole lot of in-game mechanics for online functions. In fact, it's probably the bare minimum, but they are very good about keeping up with technology. So when you look at how Persona 4 versus Persona 5 progressed in their series, they have a very strong understanding for how mass communication works within their game frame. So, you know, that's kind of the thing that I would look at in terms of how we might understand gaming mechanics and gaming design in the future, is, again, to develop a lot of things that might be that much more socially present.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying brings to mind things like, you know, photo mode in games, which is becoming increasingly, you know, popular. And, you know,
Sure.
even I took a few photos in Ghost of Tsushima because it was just such a pretty game that I'm sure I've got to
play that game.
Some on my hard drive. Are you a PlayStation gamer?
Yeah, I've got it. I'm waiting for the price to go down. But yeah, I want to play it.
Yeah. It's. I mean, I don't know how anybody can actually afford this thing. Well, especially in South Africa, because South Africa we're playing some weird tax on top of the exchange rate, and I don't know why. But like a PlayStation.
Oh, really?
A PlayStation digital edition is probably 2 months rent for me, which is ridiculous.
Oh my gosh.
So you guys get it a bit easier, but it's still like ridiculously expensive. And the games are also going up. They're going to $70. So next gen is going to be an expensive endeavor for console gamers.
Start to see why people like PC and Steam.
Yeah, well, I mean, those graphic cards prices are nothing to, you know, scoff at. They're pretty expensive as well. I think in South Africa, the 3080, geez, the 3080 is like 3 months' salary. Maybe. Or the 1390 at least. It's crazy. But
That's absurd.
I see. What you're saying makes pretty much sense. I mean, there was just a video on YouTube just the other day with Microsoft showing their controller, which has a share button now for Xbox Series. So definitely, it's something that's coming to the forefront. I think PlayStation were ahead of the game with PS4, and it's just becoming more and more integrative. PlayStation, I mean, you can now share your gameplay on a PC. Like you can play PlayStation on a PC through like LAN cables and stuff. And that's how I now stream PS4 and I don't need a capture card, even though I have one. The capture card is just a schlep to use. But it's just making it easier and easier for me to be able to share my gameplay with people over time. So yeah, it's a very interesting concept. So what about in terms of marketing and how that is changing over time? Do you have any ideas there? Because the thing is, I think video games previously were really terrible with their marketing, and I think it's gotten better over time, because it was very difficult, I think, previously to kind of show an experience, in an advert or even on a picture. But things are kind of different these days. So how do you think, Sony and Microsoft or the PC people can change their marketing, or has it changed over the years and makes people want to buy games more?
It really comes down to, well, several things, honestly. I mean, when we were looking at several generations before the consoles that we have now, the experience was, I'm going to create spatial presence, which just means that you feel like it's an illusion of technology, that you actually feel like you are in the game. So, marketing for the longest time was, let's make our graphics better. Let's make things very realistic. Well, it comes to a point, if people are familiar, like listening to this podcast of the Uncanny Valley, for instance, that things can become too real. To where they're uncomfortable. So there's a point where graphics, for instance, really, again, make people very uncomfortable. And so that actually reduces presence in this case. So, again, games like Breath of the Wild for me actually were sold to me in a way that I was really excited about, because it was something that I could be immersed for a long period of time, even though, I mean, the graphics are amazing, but they're not like photorealistic or anything like that. No. So that was a common way of marketing video games for a long period of time. Now we have to kind of look at how we can push the system in a lot of the ways of its hardware. And so, we start to look at things like motion control. That was a way that we could implement something. We could look at the gaming on the go, for instance. Nintendo releasing the Switch was a marvel, and it made up for some of the things like the Wii U. Oh gosh, the GameCube. Yeah, and the Wii U. I mean, now granted, I love the GameCube in its catalog. That was still, I think it was really unappreciated, but it was something that wasn't very well done. And so, the other things that we might consider.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
But if you look at the sales for Nintendo consoles, they were all like going down since, I think, the SNES, and there was a spike at Wii, probably because of Wii Sports, and it was, like regular people could get an idea about the Wii, and then Wii U made that drop continue. So the Switch was actually also another anomaly. Let's hope they continue doing good stuff.
Agreed. Yeah, it's but I think a lot of it depends on things like social identity for how we identify as a gamer, because, like, for instance, I'm a big JRPG fan, so PlayStation really speaks to me because they release a lot of or role-playing games within their catalog. So, games like Persona or Bloodborne were PlayStation exclusives, and they're some of my favorite games of all time. So with that, that makes a lot of sense for me specifically to buy that. So social identity might come in. Nostalgia is another thing. I can't lie. When I saw Demon Souls coming on the PlayStation, I was like, well, I think I might have to get that, even though it's a game that I've already played and it's already been released. So nostalgia plays a big role on that. And it also has to do with things like popularity of, what is everybody else getting in this case, to where, again, if the interconnectivity is a major component of it, how do I make sure I can get to play it with my friends? So, when we're marketing this, we now have to start realizing that we have a weird balance, because we've got a collection of gamers that are very strongly socially identified with their game franchises. They're extremely good with it. They don't need to be handheld. They are in it for performance or story. And then you have a collection of people that are new into gaming or play it casually, because again, we have a large collection of audience members that play games now. So putting them into one box or a couple boxes just doesn't work anymore. Even though I think I just did that right then and there. But we do kind of understand a little bit about how people play games. And if we're not careful about it in marketing, we're going to mess things up and pitch the wrong things to the wrong people. So it's really important to be able to understand, again, how do people identify with it? What is our market? So again, for things like Persona, I don't get a lot of people that are casually jumping into it. I'm getting a lot of people that are already into things like anime culture, are already into things of like relationship building within things like anime, because they are very anime driven. In this case, that a person would like JRPGs. It's a small community, but it's a very loyal community. And so understanding that particular audience segment versus somebody that I'm like, anybody could pick this up and they would enjoy it. Those are the things that we need to be thinking about. And so maybe it's a kind of a game by game basis in some cases to be able to advertise and market.
Yeah, very interesting. So yeah, it makes sense, because now when we do these console announcements and stuff, there's usually game developers who are also showcasing certain types of games. I mean, just Sony, when they revealed their stuff, they showed that Final Fantasy 16 is going to be at least a timed exclusive. And when you were saying that you chose PlayStation because of JRPGs, I mean, that's pretty much what I did as well. Another kindred spirit thing.
There you go.
Was very excited about getting the PS3, and like nowhere in my mind was Xbox 360 anywhere near, because PlayStation 1 and 2 had all of the Final Fantasies, and Xbox did not have any of them, at least for a long time. So it definitely set my console tastes and why I prefer PlayStation. So what are your favorite JRPGs? What's your top 3?
Ooh, top 3 for JRPGs specifically, or just games?
JRPGs.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd have to sit and start with Persona 5 Royal as my number 1.
Is it? Jeez, that's so recent.
Yeah. Well, and I like the original, but it was Royal just did everything to bounce off what Persona 5 did so well, and they just did it even better. So I was like, if I compare the two, I'd have to choose Royal. Then, oh boy, this is like, for the Final Fantasy, it's like choosing a favorite child. I think I'd have to go Final Fantasy. I think I'd have to go Final Fantasy X as my favorite.
Okay.
probably for the game mechanics of party switching. I love the story. It's one of the most complex, but still just really captivating. Plus, I mean, it's my nostalgia pick. We all have that Final Fantasy that brings us a lot of nostalgia.
Yeah.
And then, oh gosh, I mean, I guess I would consider it a JRPG, although it's not like turn-based. I'd have to go with Bloodborne as my third favorite.
Okay.
So
right.
I know it doesn't kind of participate in the same JRPG fashion. Or if we're still looking at that particular, I'd have to go with Fire Emblem Three Houses.
Okay, all right. I never got into the Fire Emblem series. But
that was the first one I played.
Yeah, like I said, Shining Force 2 is one of my jams. But in terms of Final Fantasy, 6 does it for me. I think 6 is my personal favorite, and I think it's the best story.
Oh, you and Dr. Cohort get along well, Matt.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's your first one, and that always sticks harder than others. Because I also have this very and this is a very controversial opinion, but I don't like Final Fantasy VII. I think Final Fantasy VII is kind of bland, and I prefer 8 over it. And I know like the general consensus is the other way around, where everybody likes Final Fantasy VII. They even remade it. And 8 is not as loved by the general populace. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think you and I need to hang out more, because I actually share that opinion. One, because Final Fantasy VIII was my first Final Fantasy. And although I can be the kind of person to admit that the junction system was kind of garbage, I don't like the junction system of Final Fantasy VIII. I love the story of it, and I prefer it to Final Fantasy VII. And it is in my top 3. So I am in the boat of, yes, your first Final Fantasy is usually the one that sticks out and is the one that you're like, that's my Final Fantasy. And honestly, it's like, give me a year to play Final Fantasy VIII again, and it might come back on top versus 10. But I'd still have to go with 10 for now. Although I did play the remake of 7, and I really enjoyed that one a lot. But it still doesn't take its place over 8.
Yeah. I love the story in 8. What do you think about 10-2? Some people don't like 10-2. Yeah.
I couldn't really get into 10-2. It really was something that I didn't like the battle mechanics. If memory serves correctly, they went back to like the Final Fantasy VII of, once you have a bar that fills up, then you can attack, instead of an order-based system from 10 that I really liked and I preferred. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I really couldn't get into the changing of outfit mechanic of Final Fantasy X. The thing that I think it did really well was being able to talk a lot more about the story about the Al-Bhed, which I think Final Fantasy X did well, but 10-2 did a better job describing it, and actually helped me write my book chapter on the psychology of Final Fantasy X. However, I couldn't get into it. And again, it wasn't anything as far as the characters were concerned. I like the characters of Final Fantasy X2, but I couldn't really get into it. I think I played about 10 hours and then stopped.
And then you were done. No, I played a lot of 10-2, and I like it. I certainly like it way better than 13 or 13-2 or Lightning Returns or whatever. But yeah, we could talk about Final Fantasy all day. But let's see.
Good.
let's see what else we could talk about. So, being into marketing and stuff, I'm sure you keep your eye on trends in terms of social media. Now with Mixer
Sure.
out of the game, how would you speculate the competition between the large streaming platforms kind of pan out over the next few years? Do you have any speculation as to what might happen?
Yeah, I've got some ideas. I First and foremost, I mean, me personally, I don't know why Mixer did what they did by going to Facebook, particularly with race relations that not only Facebook was having at the time of the move, but also Mixer was having at the time of the move. They're certainly pushing it in a direction of, let's make it more about games. They have a game widget on Facebook now. But if you look at the audience that pays attention to Facebook, your primary audience is anywhere from 35 to 42-year-olds in the target demographics that are that utilize Facebook. So, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, through a marketing perspective of why, again, Mixer would do what they did, when they did it, and how they did it, because again, they didn't tell any of their partners that they were making this move. So Twitch benefited in this case. And so, right now Twitch is ultimately where we see a lot of our streams. It is because of the move that Mixer made. It has become even more popular in this capacity of Twitch being what it is. But the other thing that I might suggest is I think we might start seeing a bigger spike in Discord, being the next advancement in terms of not necessarily streaming, but why streaming is so popular and important. Doing what we can do right now, we might start seeing a shift in making something like subscriber-based, and people are already doing this, subscriber-based streams to be specifically within the community of Discord. So making something that's already niche even more niche. And that's where we see things like media planning, for instance, and advertising of the where and the when of advertising. We're starting to see that it's not about the size of the audience, but how much they're engaged. And Twitch has that more than a lot of social media sites, as well as things like television, for instance. But Discord has it that much more. And so again, we might see it to where a broadcasting system ultimately might do what Snapchat did to things like Facebook and Twitter, which was make it more privatized. And so a website like Discord, where you've got not only video streaming, but you've got audience engagement through chat, you might see that actually do its own weird little shift in creating its own kind of streaming itself. So that's purely speculation on my part. But it is something that I have been talking with people that do a lot of work in social media they've been very accurate on trends on how YouTube progressed, how Twitch progressed. And one of the things they've been telling me was Discord is something that is going to be huge in the next couple of years. So, it seems obvious, but I didn't even think about it.
Yeah, it's now that you mention it, it makes so much sense. There's already a bit of integration between Discord and Twitch, when it comes to emojis, emoticons. And the communities definitely overlap. Like if you're a streamer, you kind of, over time, you understand that like Twitch, Discord, and like Twitter are like the three main things that are involved in streaming. And the interactivity between Twitch and Discord is really high. So I'm interested into whether the brands might try and do something together, or whether, I mean, the thing is, like, if Discord says, like, okay, we're going to start a streaming platform, then I'll be in direct competition with Twitch, so I don't know if they would want to do that, considering that the communities overlap, or whether they might join together in some way. Like if you have Twitch integration into Discord, like that might be a possibility, which I think is really interesting.
It would Yeah, it would just mean that if they were to do that, they would have to make a pretty firm commitment that this is our streaming platform, because people that are part of YouTube communities, people that are part of Mixer communities from Facebook, they still use Discord, and so you would alienate a part of that audience. It might not be that much per se, but it would still be a move that they would have to consider the ramifications for where that might come in. So, opening your own streaming services, given in the right time, might be an interesting and maybe a positive move for Discord. But there are obviously some drawbacks as well because of how synonymous is. I mean, how many people would say, if you are a streamer on Twitch, you need a Discord channel? It's almost required. Because you can't stream all the time, and so you need to make sure that your audience is going to be communicating with you during those downtimes.
Yeah, it's like the comment section on YouTube. That's pretty much what Discord is for Twitch. Yeah, which I think is really interesting, and a very interesting thought. I think I'll think about it in the future. Never thought about how that could potentially play out. But one interesting player that could come in is Spotify, because Spotify now is integrating video, and they're making big moves with licensing people like Joe Rogan. And a lot of people use the Spotify app to stream music. So it's not that far-fetched to now stream other stuff. So, what do you think? Do you think Spotify might out of nowhere just come with a streaming platform? Do you think it's possible?
When you're looking at the goal of any organization, it's always weird, because I teach communication classes, and one of the textbooks I use, it says the goal of any organization is to be immortal, is to last throughout the ages as a brand, which I'm like, gosh, that's scary. But with that, one of the things that we understand as people that work with organizational communication and marketing and advertising is that if that's the case, that we want to be around for a long period of time, you got to adapt. And so not only that, you need to move forward before other people do as well. So Spotify making a move like that, it's a reputable brand. Everybody uses it. Well, I mean, I should say everybody. Most people use it. They're also well known for people to be paying premium for their services because, they like to select on demand their music choice. I am no exception to that rule. But again, it is highly possible, that they would do something like that. I mean, you look at companies like Netflix, for instance, they were about to go out of business when they were doing their mail-in services with DVDs and so forth. And look at them now. I mean, they're releasing some of the most watched television shows out there, to the point where cable companies don't know what to do. Well, they're figuring things out in their own streaming ways, but again, that is something that Netflix adapted. So I can only presume that Spotify will do a similar adaptation. And if they see things going in the way that it's going with streamers, it is not far-fetched at all to believe that they might go in that direction.
Yeah, it's going to be a war in the next few years, at least, at the very least, between YouTube and Twitch.
Oh my goodness!
I think YouTube's a sleeping giant. I mean, they've already got a lot of the infrastructure down. I just think that they don't pay enough attention to the community side, which is what Twitch has over them. But if they,
Copa did a lot of things with that.
But I think if YouTube pays any more attention to it, Twitch could be in trouble. But I mean, that's speculation as well. It's going to be an interesting next few years in the streaming space. Hopefully Twitch doesn't just die overnight like Mixer, and we all have to move. Or maybe that might be a good thing, instead of building such a large brand over time. Yeah, and then all of a sudden it just dies. I feel sorry for those Mixer people who built their brand on Mixer.
Oh, I know. Yeah, especially those partners that had so much stake in that. I mean, people were like, I have to change my entire overlay. I won't have the audience that I had at Mixer. I was very impressed with Twitch I don't know if this was for everybody, but people who were Mixer partners that moved over to Twitch, they gave them partner status of the people I knew that happened to. And I'm like, that's a big move. And it's a very important one to make, that they don't feel like their work had been lost.
And I believe there was a deal with Facebook for partners. I don't remember how much of it they got.
I don't know.
But speaking of streaming, in your time researching and studying streaming, do you have any kind of obscure tips that you might have for streamers that they don't usually learn by themselves or from other, stream gurus or wherever?
I think one of the weirder things that I thought about was this idea of that a lot of people don't necessarily plan their day around your program. It was one of the things that I always thought that, if I've got a weekly program, people are going to be like, this is my program I'm going to identify with, and we're going to have a lot of fun on that specific day. And that's just not the case. I do my own weekly stream, and luckily I've got a community that looks forward to Tuesday nights and watching me make a fool of myself playing Skyrim. But one of the things that I'll say about it is, and goes back to our Discord talk, is it is significantly more important to establish your audience within the downtimes than it actually is on the stream itself. Because a lot of the way that you build your audience is by bringing in bonds with those people to make it that they are very much part of the creative process. When I do things from my particular stream, and I hardly consider it successful, but we usually have about 15 to 20 people in there at a time, and they know each other, and they come up, they create part of the story. One of my favorite things is that the people that are in my community helped create my character in Skyrim, helped create the narrative for who this character is. They were such an integral part for how the story is played out. And the way we did that is through Discord and commenting through Discord. So that's one of the things that you find out, especially when you are talking to the void, if you will, on your stream, which means there's just nobody watching. The best way to do it is by not only bringing people in who are maybe your friends or people that you would just say that they enjoy your content or enjoy your work. And, two of my best community members are people that just commented that I got a platinum trophy on Bloodborne, and we've been in contact ever since. The other thing I'll say is you might have direct competition on Twitch of people who do things similar to you, but Twitch is also a platform that is extremely good about collaboration and bringing people that are doing things that are similar and bringing them in. So Twitch raids are huge because now you've got people that are invested in something that is dear to you, but now they're going into another audience that they may identify with as well. And that's a personal recommendation. But also having guests from different areas goes a long way as well. So don't undermine the collaboration and always be willing to reach out within that collaboration. I've been amazed by how many people I've just been like, hey, do you want to play Skyrim on a random Tuesday night? And they're like, sure. That sounds great. I mean, the fact that you and I are talking right now is an example of that, of just reaching out to somebody. You never know. The worst they can say is no. Yeah. But more than likely, a lot of people are interested in it. If you communicate with your intentions honestly and nicely, you never know what people will come up with.
For sure. I've been interviewing people for a few years now, and I don't think I've ever gotten a no so far. Usually people are really excited to talk to you about what they're doing. Like, they're excited that you're excited about what the stuff that they're doing, because
exactly,
especially in the research space, like I think some scientists will just be huddled up in their lab, doing experiments and stuff, and the paper gets published, but sometimes with some papers, I mean, I remember this statistic from I think a couple of months ago. I read this headline that about 50% of all academic papers are only read by the authors themselves, the editor of the journal, and the reviewers. And it's kind of really sad considering how much time, effort, and money goes into research. So as far as I know, people are usually really excited to talk to you about the stuff that they do.
Absolutely.
I thought of a question while I was talking, but now my brain kind of erased it with something else. But we will plunge forward. So when it comes to gaming, now having researched games and the way people play them to an audience, if you were tasked with the direction and development of a video game, what kind of game would you make?
So, and this is actually to go into your patterns for how games are advertised and so forth. This is one thing that I thought about. It's almost like a Five Nights at Freddy's model where you could keep so many Easter eggs that people speculate about what is the story that you're telling. I have found, at least, that I love how games like Dark Souls and Skyrim and Bloodborne communicate that their story. There's some parts that are on the nose, but there's a lot of things that are hidden, that are open to speculation. If I were to design a game, my goal would be to get the community talking and make their own assertions about what it is that I'm trying to write. So, for me at least, I would want to do something that has a lot of historical references, maybe literary references of good storytellers, because I'm a perfectionist and I would want something to be paying homage to someone that I think did a really good job in terms of their storytelling or character development. But also, again, going back to what I was previously mentioning, I would want to make it so that when a community looks at my lore years down the line, that they still might be talking about fan theories. This is one of my favorite things about Skyrim, for instance, is that there's still lore videos being published right now. And I'm like, this is a game that came out in 2011, for goodness sake. And think about bang for your buck of people that are discovering new things and are still talking about how much they enjoy the story within it. So for me, it's got to be story driven. For me, it's got to be character driven, but it also has to be something that I write it, which I wouldn't know how if I wanted to. I write it in such a way that people would still want to be talking about. And part of the way of doing that is having small hints about what the plot is about by putting things like items everywhere and
environmental storytelling.
Environmental storytelling. That's it. I couldn't think of it, but thank you. So that's what I would want to do.
Yeah. Games like BioShock do that really well.
BioShock's a great example.
Witcher 3 does that really well as well. It's really cool. I'm the one of those people who don't like to pay too much attention to the books and the stuff in games. I don't know why. Although recently I played The Last of Us 2, and there's a couple of environmental storytelling plots that go through there. I mean, the zombie genre also lends a lot to this because there's always people like writing notes about trying to get away and then going to these places and that places and taking children and stuff. But I was really invested in some of the environmental storytelling in that one. So I suppose it depends on the game.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for what you're talking about here. Is you don't have to play the game where you're looking at those artifacts. Like playing through Skyrim again, there are things that I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that after 400 hours of playing this game. And again, I like for Dark Souls, I play it because of the challenge of beating bosses and banging my head against a brick wall. But then I get into the story, and those environmental things become that much more endearing to me for why is this major boss trying to kill me? So yeah, I mean, that's you can play it in multiple ways. Is what I like about those kind of games.
You have the choice to do it or not.
Exactly.
Which is really cool. And I mean, that agency is part of gaming anyway. It's one of the reasons why we gravitate towards the medium.
Sure.
Okay, so we just managed to go over an hour. I mean, there's a million things we could probably talk about. I think we jive on a lot of different things. But what I want to know, we talked about this right at the podcast, but how do you make time for everything? You seem to have your finger in so many pies. What's your secret?
One, very, very carefully. I am a schedule-oriented person. So I won't say I have it planned out by the hour. I don't. But there's a couple of things that I do. One is I try to make it sure that things are intertwined with each other. So it's not just gaming that I do. I look at it in terms of marketing research for how Twitch might work. And the reason I do what I do is because and the reason why it fits with advertising is because Twitch is huge and advertisers are interested in gaming in Twitch now. So it fits, right? And so these are the kind of things that I was like, I want to make sure that my schedule and my agenda has some intertwine to make sure everything works. But as far as time is concerned, I'm very grateful that I have a wife that understands the work commitment that I put in, because she's that way as well, and she has her own busy schedule. So we often talk about how we want to bring in not only our work schedule, but our fun schedule that may be interdependent between the two of us. Like it's important that we have our own time for us as a couple, but as separate as well, doing things that we enjoy, because we're not going to always share the same interest. So, we try to say, what's a couple nights out of the week that we're turning off our phones. We're not doing any work. It's just us in this case. And I do that with my involvement with Geeks Like Us as well. So Tuesday nights, it's very well communicated and understood. And it's very transparent that I'm doing the stream that particular night. So I think, again, as me as a communication scholar, I can't help but doing this. Having a communication pattern and being transparent about not only your work relationship, but your personal relationship is very critical to be able to have everybody on the same page. And again, not only being courteous to the people that are very close to you, but respecting your own mental health as well. Because I do a lot of work, and but I also try to make sure that I do it in such a way that is, again, interconnected, but in a way that's segmented, that I can focus on those things individually as they kind of come along.
Very.
So I hope I explained it how I do it. Sometimes I have no idea.
Very, very insightful. I think the communication bit is important. I think I've had issues with that in the past. But that's a story for another time. For today, I think with that, it's time to pack up our camp and head back to our labs and or fantasy worlds. But first, Dr. Daniel, why don't you let our fellow explorers know where they can find you and your work on the internets?
So the best place to reach me is on Twitter. My handle is @FusRoDoc, and that's FusRoDoc. So follow me on Twitter. I talk a lot about gaming research. I talk a lot about sports as well. But yeah, that's where you can find me, and I'm very active and happy to respond with any questions that you might have, or just hanging out and so forth. But you can also find me on Twitch. I'm the marketing director for Geeks Like Us, which is a nonprofit for mental health advocacy and turning your passion into a career. So I run a weekly stream. It's called Lore du Jour, where we take those environmental storytelling and we talk about the inner lore within some famous video games. So we've done Bloodborne and Skyrim. So that's every Tuesday night. Night in the United States, I should say. But yeah, that's where you can find me. That's where I'm most present. So I'd love to continue this conversation.
Sure. And thank you, Dr. Dan, for joining me today in today's conversation. But I'm sure we'll have many more, both online and over stream. And thank you to the listeners for sparing your time. I hope you had fun learning with us today. Otherwise, stay safe, keep well, stay tuned, and cheers.
Thank you.